Now, there's every studio, every distributor in the country wanted the picture.
Uh-huh.
They all wanted it. But when the legal department saw the picture, they said, lay off.
He was born into something much darker. Not fame, not glamour, not the Hollywood mythology people would later project onto him. Charles Bronson was born into a world that didn't care whether you survived, and that truth never left him. Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania, a mining town where the sky was gray, the walls were thin, and childhood ended the moment you were strong enough to lift a shovel. His father died young. His family had nothing. And before most boys learned how to dream, Charles Buczynski learned how to work. Down into the mines, down into darkness, down into a place where fear didn't matter because survival came first. That's where the silence began. Not as a persona, not as an acting style, as armor. The same armor he would later carry through every role and every moment anyone tried to compare him to James Garner. Because while the world saw a stoic, tough guy legend, Bronson knew who he really was. A man who had spent his entire life digging his way out of the earth and discovering that some walls follow you wherever you go. And that was the difference. That was the thing that haunted him whenever someone mentioned Garner's name. Because James Garner had lived through pain too. He'd been to war, he'd carried scars, he'd seen the same darkness. But somehow, he didn't wear it like armor. And Bronson could never quite understand how. He'd later say it as simply as possible. James Garner was a real actor. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. But before those words ever left his mouth, before respect turned into confession, Bronson went through a lifetime of being shaped, hardened, and rebuilt by a world that didn't forgive weakness. And it started long before the cameras, long before fame, long before anyone thought to ask what he really saw when he looked at James Garner. He was a teenager when he took his father's place underground. Coal dust in his lungs, hands torn open, $1 a ton, no time to talk, no reason to complain. You learned to keep moving. You learned to keep quiet. You learned that in places like that, words didn't save you. Endurance did. That was the silence people later mistook for mystery. That was the stillness audiences called intensity. It wasn't performance, it was survival. And years later, when critics compared him to Garner, when they said Garner seemed lighter, warmer, more effortless, Bronson heard something deeper than they realized. They weren't comparing careers, they were comparing lives. And that comparison stayed with him, even when he left the mines, even when the war came, even when he flew combat missions, was wounded, and came home with the kind of memories men don't talk about unless they have to. He reinvented himself, studied art, studied theater, changed his name. Bronson. A name that sounded harder, straighter, less vulnerable. A name that could stand in front of a camera without showing where it came from. Hollywood didn't welcome him, not at first. He wasn't charming, he wasn't polished, he didn't bend. He didn't look like the men audiences were used to. He looked like someone who had already lived 3 lives before the first line of dialogue was ever written. And when James Garner appeared on screen, confident, natural, unforced, Bronson noticed. Because Garner didn't need armor. He didn't need silence. He didn't need intensity to prove he lived. And that difference is what made Bronson think about him more than he ever admitted. Not as a rival, not as competition, but as a mirror. A reminder that 2 men can walk through the same fire and come out carrying completely different versions of themselves. And for Charles Bronson, that realization never stopped hurting. Not because he resented Garner, but because, deep down, he wondered what his life would have looked like if he had ever learned how to live without armor.
James Garner was a real actor, Bronson said, his voice low, deliberate. He didn't have to play tough, he just was himself, and that's a rare thing in this business. 9 simple words that carried the weight of 50 years. Because coming from Charles Bronson, a man who built an empire on silence, stone-faced intensity, and the kind of presence that didn't need explanation, that wasn't just a compliment, it was an admission. An acknowledgement that while the world saw them as rivals, as different kinds of tough, as symbols of two opposing styles of masculinity, Bronson had been watching Garner the entire time, measuring himself against him, wondering what it was that Garner had that made everything look so effortless. And it haunted him, because Bronson knew how hard it was to be real in Hollywood. He knew what it cost to carry that weight. He knew the difference between men who performed toughness and men who lived it. And Garner, somehow, impossibly, did both. He was real, and Bronson spent years trying to figure out how. This isn't a story about rivalry. It's not about competition or jealousy or two men fighting over the same space. It's about something quieter than that, something heavier. It's about the truth Bronson carried in silence for decades. The truth that James Garner was the one actor he couldn't dismiss, couldn't reduce to an image, couldn't pretend was anything less than the genuine article. And that knowledge sat with him through every film, every role, every moment when someone compared them or put them in opposite categories or tried to make them enemies. Bronson never corrected them. He just stayed quiet, the way he always did, and let the weight accumulate. To understand why Bronson's words about Garner mattered, why they cut so deep, why they revealed so much, you have to understand where Bronson came from, because Charles Bronson wasn't born into Hollywood. He was born into hell. November 3rd, 1921, Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. A coal mining town so bleak it barely qualified as a town at all. Just rows of identical company houses, black dust that never washed off, and the constant understanding that your life would be short, brutal, and forgettable. He was born Charles Dennis Buczynski, the 11th of 15 children in a Lithuanian immigrant family that had fled Eastern Europe looking for something better and found something just as bad. His father, Walter, worked in the mines, died young, left the family with nothing, and Charles, barely a teenager, had to take his place. Not metaphorically, literally, down into the darkness, down into the coal dust and the danger and the knowledge that every day could be the day the earth swallowed you whole. He earned $1 per ton of coal he shoveled. $1 for back-breaking labor that destroyed men twice his age. That's where Bronson learned silence. That's where he learned that words were cheap and survival was expensive. That's where the look came from, the stone-faced, unflinching stare that would later terrify audiences worldwide. It wasn't an act, it was armor, built in the mines, forged by poverty, hardened by the understanding that showing weakness meant death. World War II came. Bronson enlisted in the Army Air Forces, flew 25 combat missions as an aerial gunner, got shot, survived, earned a Purple Heart, came home and realized that surviving the war was just the beginning. Because what do you do when you've seen death up close, when you've carried your father's ghost down into the mines, when you've been wounded in the sky and somehow made it back to Earth? You find something to build, something to prove you existed. He used the GI Bill to study art, theater, acting, changed his name to Bronson in the 1950s, partly to avoid anti-communist blacklisting, partly to become someone new, someone who wasn't the coal miner's son, someone who could stand on a stage or in front of a camera and make people believe he was more than survival, that he was strength incarnate. But Hollywood didn't want him at first. Not really. He was too rough, too foreign-looking, too intense. He got bit parts, uncredited roles. You're in the Navy now, The People Against O'Hara, faces in the crowd that nobody remembered. He played thugs, soldiers, men who died in the first act, and he took every role because he understood something most actors didn't. You don't get to choose your beginning. You just endure it until it becomes something else. House of Wax, 1953. Veracruz, 1954. Slowly, people started noticing, not because he was charming, not because he was handsome in the traditional sense, but because when Charles Bronson appeared on screen, you felt it. That presence, that weight, the sense that this man had lived through something real and carried it with him everywhere he went. Machine Gun Kelly, 1958. His breakout, playing a ruthless gangster with just enough vulnerability to make you understand why he became what he became. Critics noticed, audiences noticed, Europe especially noticed, because Europeans understood something about Bronson that Americans were slower to grasp. He wasn't playing a character. He was revealing a truth about what men become when the world breaks them and they refuse to stay broken. The Magnificent Seven, 1960. Bernardo O'Reilly, the compassionate gunslinger who fights for the poor, the one who understands that violence is sometimes the only language oppression understands. Bronson played him with quiet dignity, with the understanding that heroism isn't loud, it's just doing what needs to be done when everyone else has given up. The Great Escape, 1963. Danny, the Tunnel King, a claustrophobic prisoner of war digging through darkness to find freedom. Bronson made you feel the weight of the earth pressing down, made you feel what it cost to keep digging when every instinct screamed to stop, made you understand that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's continuing despite it. And through all of this, through every role, every performance, every moment of emerging stardom, Bronson was watching James Garner. Because they kept crossing paths, kept being compared, kept occupying the same cultural space as symbols of American masculinity, but different symbols, different kinds of strength. And Bronson couldn't figure out how Garner made it look so easy.
Because James Garner had something Bronson didn't, a lightness, an ease, a smile that suggested he'd figured out some secret about life that Bronson was still searching for. Garner could be tough without being heavy, could be strong without being stone, could be real without carrying the weight of the world in every frame. And that bothered Bronson more than he ever admitted. Not because he was jealous, not because he wanted to be Garner, but because it made him question whether the armor he'd built, the silence, the intensity, the refusal to bend, was strength or just another kind of prison. Whether he'd spent his entire life surviving when he could have been living. "There's a lot of pretending in Hollywood," Bronson said years later. "James didn't pretend. You believed him. Whether he was playing a soldier, a gambler, or just a man trying to do the right thing, he made it real." And that word, real, that's what haunted Bronson, because he knew he was real too. Knew his intensity came from genuine experience, knew his silence was earned. But Garner's version of real looked different, felt different. It didn't come with the same cost, didn't require the same sacrifice, didn't demand that you carry every wound like a badge. Garner had been a soldier too, Korean War, wounded in action, came home with his own scars, his own understanding of what it meant to face death and survive. But somehow, he didn't let it define him the way Bronson did. He integrated it, carried it quietly, used it as foundation rather than fortress. He was a soldier before he was an actor. That never left him. He carried himself like a man who'd seen the world, not just read about it. There was kinship in that observation, recognition, two men who understood that real toughness isn't performed, it's lived. Two men who'd been tested by something bigger than Hollywood, who'd proven themselves in ways that had nothing to do with box office numbers or critical acclaim, who knew the difference between men who talked about strength and men who embodied it. But there was also distance, because even though they shared that foundation, they built different structures on top of it. Bronson built walls, Garner built bridges. Bronson chose silence, Garner chose conversation. Bronson became the myth, Garner remained the man. "We were different kinds of tough," Bronson explained. "Garner had that smile, that easy confidence.
I didn't have that. I was all stone and smoke, but I respected him because he could play it honest and he never had to show off. Listen to that carefully. He never had to show off. Coming from Bronson, that's not just observation, it's confession. Because Bronson's entire career was built on showing, on presence, on making sure you understood he was the most dangerous man in the room. It wasn't ego, it was survival instinct, the same instinct that kept him alive in the mines and the war, the understanding that if you don't establish dominance, someone else will dominate you. But Garner didn't operate that way, didn't need to, and Bronson saw that, admired it, and maybe, in his quietest moments, envied it. Not the fame, not the success, but the freedom, the ability to be strong without being defensive, to be real without being guarded, to live instead of just surviving. The 1970s brought Bronson the stardom that had eluded him for decades. The Mechanic, the Valachi Papers, Hard Times, and then Death Wish, 1974. Paul Kersey, the New York architect who becomes a vigilante after his wife is murdered and his daughter is assaulted. A man pushed beyond his limits who decides that if the system won't deliver justice, he will. The film exploded. Not because it was subtle, not because it was nuanced, but because it tapped into something raw in the American psyche: fear, rage, the sense that civilization was crumbling and someone needed to fight back. Bronson's stone-faced performance captured that perfectly. He didn't play Kersey as a hero, he played him as a man doing what needed to be done. No speeches, no justifications, just action. Critics hated it, called it fascist, dangerous, irresponsible. Audiences loved it, made Bronson one of the biggest box office draws in the world, spawned 4 sequels, turned him into a global icon of retribution, the man who made violence look like justice. But here's what nobody talks about. Here's what Bronson never said publicly, but carried privately. He knew Death Wish wasn't real, knew it was fantasy, knew it gave audiences catharsis for problems that couldn't be solved with a gun. And he knew that James Garner would never have played that role. Not because Garner couldn't, but because Garner understood something about masculinity that Bronson was only beginning to grasp. Real strength doesn't need revenge. Real toughness doesn't require violence. Real men don't have to prove anything. And Garner proved that every time he appeared on screen. Whether he was playing Brett Maverick with that knowing smile, or Jim Rockford with that exhausted decency, or any of the dozens of roles where you believe that intelligence and humor and humanity were just as tough as fists and guns, maybe tougher, because anyone can hit, but it takes real strength to walk away, real courage to choose compassion over vengeance, real toughness to remain decent in an indecent world. Bronson never said this out loud, but you could see it in the way he talked about Garner. The respect, the admiration, the quiet acknowledgement that while the world celebrated Bronson's intensity, Garner had figured out something more sustainable, something more real. People thought because he came from TV he wasn't serious. That's nonsense. Garner could hold his own on a movie set. He was natural, and that's something you can't fake. That word again. Natural, as opposed to what? Constructed, performed, armored. Bronson didn't say it directly, but the implication hung there, that his own toughness, his own intensity, was something he'd built, something he maintained, something that required
constant effort, while Garner's strength just was effortless, integrated, real in a way that didn't need defending. The years passed. Both men became legends, icons of different eras, different styles, different philosophies about what it meant to be a man on screen. Bronson continued making action films into his 60s and 70s. 10 to Midnight, The Evil That Men Do, Death Wish 5. The quality declined, but the persona remained. Stone-faced, unbreakable, silent. Off-screen, though, Bronson was different than people imagined. He was intensely private, loyal to those he loved, devoted to his wife, Jill Ireland, especially during her long battle with breast cancer. When she died in 1990, something broke in Bronson. The armor cracked, and for the first time, people saw the man underneath, the one who'd been there all along, the one who felt everything but showed nothing. Those who knew him spoke of his humor, his gentleness, his love of simple things, painting, carpentry, time alone on his Malibu ranch. All the things the public never saw because they didn't fit the image, because Charles Bronson the man wasn't Charles Bronson the myth, and maintaining the myth required sacrificing the man. Garner never had to make that sacrifice, never had to choose between authenticity and image, because somehow, impossibly, his image was his authenticity. What you saw was what you got, and that made all the difference. When asked late in life if there was rivalry between them, Bronson dismissed it immediately. No rivalry, we were too different to compete. I always figured the audience could tell who was real, and Garner, he was real. Then he paused, and what came next sounded less like commentary and more like confession. If there were more James Garners in this town, maybe it'd be a better place. Think about what that means, coming from a man who'd spent his entire career being the opposite of Garner, being the dark to Garner's light, the stone to Garner's warmth, the silence to Garner's conversation. Bronson was saying that maybe, just maybe, Garner had it right all along, that the armor Bronson wore wasn't strength, it was protection. And protection implies fear. And fear, however justified, however earned, is still fear. Garner didn't have to prove anything, Bronson continued. He'd been through life. He'd earned his scars. You can't act that, you live it. And there it was, the truth Bronson had been circling for decades. Both men had lived it. Both men had earned their scars. Both men were real. But Garner didn't let his scars define him, didn't let his wounds become his identity, didn't confuse survival with living. And Bronson did. For most of his life, that's exactly what he did. Survived instead of lived. Maintained the fortress instead of opening the door. Stayed silent because silence was safer than vulnerability. And by the time he realized that maybe there was another way, that maybe Garner's way was just as strong but far less lonely, it was too late to change. The final years were cruel. Bronson's health declined. Metastatic lung cancer, COPD from decades of heavy smoking, congestive cardiomyopathy. His lungs failed, his heart failed. The body that had carried him through poverty, war, and 50 years of filmmaking finally gave out. He died August 30th, 2003, 81 years old. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The official cause of death was respiratory failure, but the truth was more complicated. Everything was failing. The coal dust from his youth, the cigarettes from his middle age, the accumulated damage of a life lived hard and a persona maintained harder. They buried him in Vermont, a quiet cemetery in West Windsor, rural, secluded, the kind of place Bronson had always preferred, away from Hollywood, away from the myth, just a man returning to Earth. The modest grave marker reflected the man, not the legend. Simple, understated, the kind of final resting place that suggested maybe, in the end, he'd figured out that the armor wasn't necessary anymore. James Garner outlived him by 11 years, and when Garner died in 2014, the tributes poured in. Stories about his kindness, his humor, his decency, his authenticity. All the things Bronson had observed but struggled to embody. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that Bronson failed, but that he succeeded so completely at being Charles Bronson the myth that he never got to fully be Charles Buczynski the man, the coal miner's son, the soldier, the artist, the person underneath all that stone and smoke. He was the kind of man I respected, Bronson had said about Garner, and that's saying something. It was saying everything. It was saying, I see you. I understand what you did. I know how hard it is to be real in a place built on illusion. I know what it costs to choose authenticity over armor. And I respect that. even though I couldn't do it myself, even though I chose a different path, even though I built walls where you built bridges. I respect that. It was saying, you figured out something I never did, how to be tough without being hard, how to be strong without being stone, how to be real without being raw. And I watched you my entire career, measured myself against you, wondered what you had that I didn't. It was saying, maybe if I'd had your courage, the courage to be vulnerable, to be warm, to let people in, maybe I would have been happier. Maybe the success would have felt different. Maybe the silence would have been less lonely. But Bronson never said any of that directly. He just said, James Garner was a real actor. He didn't have to play tough. He just was himself. And that's a rare thing in this business. 9 words that carried 50 years of observation, admiration, and unspoken regret. 2 men, 2 different paths, 2 different definitions of strength, but only one of them figured out that strength doesn't require armor, that being real doesn't mean being hard, that you can survive the darkness without becoming it. And in the end, that's what Bronson's silence about Garner revealed. Not rivalry, not competition, but recognition. The quiet acknowledgement that while the world celebrated Bronson's intensity, Garner had discovered something more valuable, something more sustainable, something more human. The ability to be tough and kind, strong and gentle, real and warm, all at the same time. And Charles Bronson, who spent his entire life being one thing so completely that he forgot there were other options, finally admitted what he'd known all along, but never said out loud. James Garner figured it out, and I never did. If you found this story worth your time, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.